He did not look at her when they pronounced them man and wife. The orchestra played, the chandeliers blazed, and hundreds of eyes glittered like jewels behind masks of civility, but the Duke of Wessex stood beside his bride as though carved from marble. His silence was not coldness, it was absence, as though the soul behind those proud grey eyes had turned away before the ceremony began. The guests whispered, fanning themselves with delight at such scandal, how the Duke still mourned the Viscount's daughter who had drowned in the Thames 2 winters past, how he had been forced by Her Majesty's Council to marry Lady Evelina Harcourt for the sake of alliance and reputation. Evelina heard every murmur. Her smile did not falter, though it trembled at the corners like glass. She had practiced composure in the mirror for weeks, learning to hide the ache beneath grace. When the Duke's gloved hand briefly touched hers, she felt the faintest pressure, no warmth, no recognition, only duty. She had imagined their wedding as a quiet redemption for both, her family's fortune restored, his name steadied after ruin. Yet as the vows echoed through the cathedral, she understood she was less a bride than a seal pressed upon parchment. The carriage that bore them to Ashbourne Manor rattled through a sea of snow and torchlight. Inside, the silence thickened until it seemed to breathe. Evelina's veil, damp with melted flakes, clung to her throat, she dared not speak. He stared out the window as though the night offered answers she never could. When the wheels struck a stone, she flinched, and his gaze flicked toward her for the first time. The moment was fleeting, but she saw it, the brief flicker of conflict in his eyes before the shutters closed again. Ashbourne rose from the mist like a shadowed kingdom, its towers etched in frost, its gardens skeletal beneath the moon. Servants bowed as they entered, candles bloomed along the staircases like stars, awaiting the warmth of a household newly joined. Yet none came. The Duke's voice was measured when he instructed the butler to prepare separate chambers. A murmur passed through the staff, discreet but sharp, and Evelina's heart sank. She wished he would offer even the pretense of affection, for their dignity, if not their happiness, but he merely removed his gloves, nodded once, and disappeared into the darkened corridor that led to his study. Alone, she walked into the room meant for her, the Duchess's chamber. Gilded mirrors, lace curtains, the perfume of roses. The air felt borrowed. She stood before the hearth, unpinning her veil, watching the firelight dance over her reflection. Somewhere in the manor, a door closed. The sound was final, like the turning of a key. Evelina pressed a hand to her stomach, steadying herself against the wave of humiliation. No tears came. Not yet. She had been raised to bear disgrace as gracefully as diamonds. Outside, the snow thickened. From the window she saw the Duke crossing the terrace, his dark cloak flaring behind him like a shadow untethered. For a heartbeat, she almost called his name. But what would she say? That she pitied him? That she still hoped? Her throat tightened with words she would never speak. Days blurred into weeks. The marriage became an arrangement of silence, two figures inhabiting parallel worlds beneath the same roof. The Duke rose early, rode out to oversee the tenants, returned late to dine in silence. He spoke to her politely when protocol demanded but never lingered long enough for conversation to form. Evelina filled her hours with letters, music, and the charitable accounts she managed for the local orphanage. The servants came to adore her gentle steadiness, though they pitied the loneliness that trailed her like a veil. One afternoon, the Dowager Duchess arrived unannounced, her silver hair coiled like a crown of frost. She appraised Evelina with a gaze sharp as glass. He was not forced into this, she said, voice clipped. He agreed because he must. Do not imagine love will follow obligation. My son does not love easily. I do not expect it, Evelina answered softly. But I will not be ashamed of trying. The Dowager studied her, something unspoken softening in her expression. You have courage, she said at last. That will wound you more than his cruelty ever could. Then she departed, leaving the faint scent of lavender and judgment in her wake. That night, Evelina dreamed of laughter echoing through empty halls. When she woke, the pillow beside her was untouched, cold as stone. She rose before dawn, stepping barefoot onto the frozen balcony. Below, the manor slept beneath a quilt of white. Her breath ghosted in the air. Somewhere in that sleeping estate lived a man she could not reach, a man bound to her by law but separated by grief deeper than pride. Winter bled into spring. The gardens began to bloom again, timidly, as if uncertain they were permitted joy. Evelina wandered among the roses one morning and found the Duke standing near the fountain, his gloved hand trailing through the water. The sunlight caught in his hair, revealing silver threads she had never noticed before. She hesitated, then curtsied, murmuring, "Your Grace." He inclined his head but did not speak. The silence between them stretched taut, fragile. Then a gust of wind lifted her shawl. Instinctively, he caught it before it fell into the water. Their hands brushed. For a moment, the world seemed to still. But he released the fabric at once, stepping back as though burned. "Forgive me," she whispered. "There is nothing to forgive," he replied, but his voice was too quick, too precise. She wanted to ask what haunted him so relentlessly, what memory he carried like a chain. Yet his posture, his tone, his every movement told her she was trespassing upon sacred ground. That evening, during supper, he barely touched his food. When she spoke of the new school built for the tenants' children, he nodded once, distracted. His gaze drifted to the candlelight, then to the piano across the room, the same piano she played each night when she thought him gone. "You play well," he said suddenly. She looked up, startled. "You have heard me?" He hesitated. The walls of this house carry sound farther than one expects. It was the first compliment he had ever given her. Small, almost accidental, but it lingered like warmth after frost. For the first time since their vows, Evelina felt the faintest stirring of hope. Later, when she returned to her chamber, she found the fire newly tended, though she had given no order. On the mantel lay a single white rose, its petals edged with snow. No note. No name. Only the faint scent of winter rain. She stood in the flickering light, unsure whether to weep or smile. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed softly, the same sound she had once feared, now echoing like a heartbeat through the stillness. And for the first time since her wedding, Lady Evelina wondered if the Duke of Wessex had looked at her after all. It began with laughter, cruel, bright, echoing through the ballroom like the crack of glass. "The silent Duchess," someone said, and the circle around the piano dissolved into whispers. The words spread quickly, rippling through lace and champagne. Evelina felt them land upon her shoulders as if they were weight sewn into her gown. She stood near the marble column, spine straight, smile faint, while her husband, her duke, conversed across the room with an earl's widow, the woman whose gloved hand rested far too easily upon his arm. The orchestra played a waltz, but the rhythm faltered beneath the hum of gossip. She had been invited to the spring gathering at Lord Ashcroft's estate, her first public appearance since the wedding. She had hoped for redemption, some quiet proof that time had softened the edges of their story. Instead, she found herself once more the subject of curiosity, an unloved wife, a pitying tale whispered between fans. When the music ended, the Duke crossed the room, bowing to a group of ministers before meeting her eyes. His expression held no reproach, no tenderness, only the polite detachment of a man fulfilling obligation. "You should dance," he said, his tone so measured it might have been carved from marble. "With whom, Your Grace?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then offered his arm. The crowd watched as they took the floor, husband and wife, perfect in form, strangers in soul. Each step was precise, elegant, empty. When the music ceased, he released her hand before the applause faded, turning to speak with a diplomat from London. She curtsied and withdrew, the echo of the waltz fading like a breath she could not exhale. The journey back to Ashbourne was silent. The moon rode low above the trees, the carriage wheels whispering over gravel. He did not speak. She did not ask why the widow's laughter had followed them out into the night. Weeks turned into months. The season's gossip grew louder, tales of the Duke's dinners in London, his rumored affection for a woman whose beauty was as vivid as Evelina's was serene. Yet inside the manor, no bitterness crossed her lips. She managed the tenants' disputes, oversaw the school's progress, tended the rose gardens he never visited. Her dignity became both shield and burden. One morning, while inspecting accounts, she found a sealed envelope upon her writing desk. No crest, no mark. Inside, a folded note in a bold, unfamiliar hand: "You may command the Duke's name, but not his heart. That belongs elsewhere." Beneath the words, "A pressed violet." Evelina's breath caught. The cruelty was almost elegant. She placed the letter in the fire, watching it curl into ash, her expression unchanged. When the Duke returned that evening, weary from the journey, he found her reading by the hearth. "You have been quiet," he said. "I am as I have always been," she answered. "Too quiet, perhaps." His tone was sharper than intended. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a calm that unnerved him. "Would you prefer I quarrel?" He frowned, then turned away. "No. You would not know how." Her lips curved faintly. "You mistake gentleness for weakness, Your Grace. It is often the quieter heart that endures longest." He left the room without reply. Yet her words lingered, unsettling something in him he could not name. Days later, a messenger arrived with news of a scandal, a forged letter, allegedly written by the Duchess, declaring love for another man, a stablemaster dismissed the previous year. The story spread swiftly, reaching London salons and the Queen's whispering court. For the first time, the Duke's pride flared, not as husbandly affection but as fury. His family name, dragged through the mud for pity's sport. He rode to the magistrate's office, demanded inquiry, confronted those who dared repeat the tale. When asked if he believed his wife guilty, he answered coldly, "My wife possesses more honor in silence than most men do in speech." The statement stunned the press, silencing rumor with the weight of his authority. When he returned to Ashbourne that night, mud on his boots and exhaustion in his eyes, Evelina waited in the drawing room. She rose when he entered, uncertain whether gratitude or anger belonged between them. "You defended me," she said quietly. "Do you imagine I would not?" His voice was softer than she expected. "I imagined you might find it convenient not to." For the first time, he looked directly at her. The firelight carved shadow and warmth across his face. "I will not have my wife slandered," he said. "Not while I bear the title of her husband." Her heart gave a single, traitorous beat. "Is it pride, then, that protects me?" He hesitated. "If pride keeps wolves from your door, does it matter whose it is?" She lowered her gaze. "It matters to me." The silence between them grew heavy, intimate in its restraint. He stepped closer, as if drawn by something beyond reason. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he murmured, "You deserve more than rumor for company." Then he turned away, the distance between them measured not in paces but in years. Later, when the servants retired, Evelina wandered into the library, the only room where his absence did not haunt her. Candlelight flickered over rows of leather spines. On the desk lay a small volume she did not recognize. She opened it to find a pressed rose, carefully preserved, and beneath it, in his handwriting, "To the woman whose silence speaks more than any prayer." Her breath caught. She ran her fingertips over the words, half afraid they would vanish. He had left no signature, yet there was no mistaking the script. Something inside her shifted, a fragile hope, trembling like a candle against the wind. The next morning, she found him at breakfast, reading correspondence. She wished to thank him but could not find the courage to expose what he had chosen to hide. Instead, she poured his tea, their fingers brushing briefly as she handed the cup. He did not withdraw. The smallest contact lingered, unnoticed by the room but monumental in its quiet. As summer deepened, their conversations grew more frequent, though still wrapped in restraint. He asked about her charities, she inquired about his estates. The distance between them began to thin, fragile threads forming where walls once stood. Yet the world beyond Ashbourne was not kind. One evening, a footman brought news from London. The widow, the same woman whose laughter once haunted the ballroom, had been seen wearing the Duke's signet ring. Evelina dismissed the servant before he could speak further, her pulse unsteady. When her husband entered moments later, she stood by the window, pale and composed. "You have given her your ring?" His brow furrowed. "No. It was stolen weeks ago." "Then the world believes otherwise." "I care little for what the world believes," he said, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Evelina met his eyes, her voice calm but unflinching. "You should, Your Grace. For I am the one who bears its whispers." He stepped toward her, anger rising, not at her accusation, but at himself. "I will end it." "How?" she asked. "By truth." "And what truth will they hear? That the Duke of Wessex cannot love the woman who bears his name." Her words struck him like a blade. He could not answer. That night, he stood outside her door, the flicker of candlelight spilling through the crack. Her silhouette moved within, graceful, solitary, unbearably patient. He raised his hand, meaning to knock, to speak, to say something. But the weight of 2 years' silence held him still. The candle dimmed. The door remained closed. And in that pause, thin as breath, long as grief, he finally understood how far he had let her drift beyond his reach. It began with thunder, not in the sky, but within the walls of Ashbourne. A violent storm had rolled across the countryside, rattling windows and flooding the lanes, forcing travelers and servants alike to remain indoors. The manor groaned under the weight of rain and wind, its corridors echoing with the low roar of tempests. But the true disturbance was not the storm outside, it was the one that had taken root between the Duke and Duchess, too long restrained, too long silenced. When lightning split the heavens, the glass in the drawing-room shuddered. Evelina stood beside the hearth, arms wrapped around herself, the flicker of firelight painting her in gold and shadow. The Duke entered without knocking, his coat drenched, his eyes wild with the residue of rage. "Why do you ride in such weather?" she asked, stepping forward. "I needed air," he said flatly. "In a storm like this?" He met her gaze, the faintest tremor in his jaw. "There are storms worth facing, my lady, and some better left behind closed doors." Her voice softened. "Then why do you open them only to leave me on the other side?" He said nothing. The fire cracked, throwing light between them like a challenge. Outside, the wind howled through the chimneys, a mournful choir echoing their silence. For 2 years, she had practiced composure as survival. Tonight, something within her broke that discipline. "You defend me before the world," she said, "but within these walls, I am invisible." His shoulders stiffened. "Would you rather I offer false affection before servants? Make theater of what I cannot feel?" Her reply was swift, fierce. You feel too much, you simply bury it beneath pride and ghosts. The air between them pulsed. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous calm. You presume to know what haunts me? I live beside your silence, Edward, she said, his name escaping like a confession. I know its weight. I know its cruelty. He turned sharply, as if her use of his name had struck him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The firelight drew them closer, not in step, but in breath. Rain hammered the windows, relentless, intimate. Finally, his voice faltered into something fragile. The woman I loved drowned because I let her go alone. The river took her, because I believed my pride more valuable than apology. His eyes darkened with memory. Every night, I hear the water. Evelina's heart ached. She stepped toward him, her tone no longer defensive, only human. And so you punished yourself by punishing me. He closed his eyes. I married you to restore order, to silence scandal. I told myself I owed you respect, nothing more. Her voice trembled. And now? His gaze lifted, raw, unguarded. Now I find I cannot breathe when you turn away. The confession hung between them, fragile, disbelieving. The thunder rolled again, but neither flinched. She moved closer, the distance shrinking until the warmth of the fire blurred with the warmth of his breath. You should not say such things, she whispered. Then tell me to stop. She did not. Her hands, trembling, rested on the edge of the mantel. You speak as though it costs you to care. It does, he said. Because caring means remembering, and I swore never to feel again. A log collapsed in the fire, sparks scattering like startled birds. She saw the pain etched across his face, the proud man stripped bare of defense. Slowly, she reached out, touching the cuff of his sleeve. It was a small gesture, tentative, but he did not pull away. Do you think her memory demands your misery? She asked softly. Would she have wanted you to live half a life in penance? He shook his head. I no longer know what she would have wanted. Only what I have done. Then do something different, she said, voice firm now. Begin again. His laugh was low, disbelieving. With whom? With the woman you have already broken. That silenced him. For the first time, he looked at her not as duty, not as consolation, but as possibility. Rain streaked down the windows like tears, the candles flickered, the distance between them ceased to exist. Evelina, he murmured, her name strange on his tongue, reverent, careful. You deserved more than the shell of a man. And yet, she replied, you are here. A crack of lightning illuminated the room, their faces caught in its pale brilliance, every emotion bare. Then darkness reclaimed them, the only light the trembling fire. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was hesitant, almost frightened. You still tremble when I am near, he said quietly. I tremble because you look at me as though you finally see me. I do. His hand lingered against her skin. For a heartbeat, the world stilled, rain, fire, grief, all woven into one breathless silence. Then, with a slow exhale, he stepped back, the restraint of years returning like armor. Forgive me, he whispered. I have no right. She turned away before he could see her tears. And yet you ask forgiveness for wanting what you already have. He stared at her, the meaning of her words sinking deeper than any blade. The clock struck midnight, each chime slow and deliberate, marking the end of one silence and the birth of another. Do you think I could ever earn what I have destroyed? He asked. She faced him then, her expression no longer fragile but steady, luminous. Love is not earned, Edward. It is endured. The storm began to ease. The air between them carried the scent of rain and ash. He reached for her hand but stopped inches away, as though afraid his touch might break the spell. Do not look at me that way, he said softly. You make it too easy to forget what I am. What are you? She asked. A man still learning how to forgive himself. She smiled faintly, a sadness and tenderness entwined. Then perhaps we are both learning. Outside, the first quiet of dawn crept over the horizon, dim and silver. The storm had passed, leaving the manor cloaked in stillness. Yet inside, the world had shifted irreversibly. The fire burned low, its last embers whispering secrets neither dared to speak aloud. He turned toward the door, pausing only once. If I stay, I may not leave. Then stay, she said, though her voice was barely more than breath. He hesitated, the battle between desire and restraint tearing across his face. Finally, he stepped back, leaving her by the fire. The door closed softly, the echo hollow yet alive with promise. Evelina pressed her palm to her heart, feeling its wild, frightened rhythm. For 2 years, she had waited for his eyes, his voice, his truth. Now that she had them, she feared the cost. In the corridor, the Duke paused, his hand resting against the wall. Behind him, the light of the hearth flickered beneath her door, steady and golden. He whispered her name once, barely audible, meant for no ears but his own, then walked away before he could change his mind. And in that fragile space between what was confessed and what was denied, love began to breathe.